It just is what that's it is what it is. It's not the most attractive habit to have. Let's see. And the cigarettes were said to have spread to Asia via Spain as well. So Spain's given us a lot really over the years, and they did this through their colonization of the Philippines and also through other European settlements in Asia. And I never really thought about this, but in the video I watched, put it into perspective. The fact that tobacco was native to the Americas, so it had to be brought to Asia. It wasn't something that just there are some things that we look up in the show, and it's like, oh, everybody was kind of doing their version of the same thing before it became mainstream. But this is one thing that actually did have to come from this particular part of the world because it didn't grow anywhere else. And so then we get to the modernizing of the cigarette. So in 1845, the French State Tobacco Company began making cigarettes, and that's probably where we really get the first real injection of that kind of word into like the zeitgeist, and it begins to be like, oh, what are these? These are cigarettes. Before that, they probably had all sorts of, like we said, different types of names. They're also wrapped with different things. So there was no standard at that point. The first patented cigarette making machine was invented by Juan Nepomuceno Adorno of Mexico in 1847. Yeah. In 1875, the Allen and Ginter Company in Richmond, Virginia, offered a prize of $75,000, which is equal to $1.8 million today, for the invention of a machine able to roll cigarettes. And so they basically put out a call that was like, make us something that can roll a bunch of cigarettes. And I live in Richmond actually, and I do have to say I drive through a beautiful neighborhood named Ginter Park all the time on the way home from work, and I've always wondered what this guy Ginter did to get that entire neighborhood named after him. And it turns out all you have to do is revolutionize the cigarette business. And so there's a man named Bonsack who took up the challenge and left college to devote his time to building such machine. In 1880, he had his first working prototype, which was destroyed by a fire while it was in storage in Lynchburg, Virginia. So many things destroyed by fire back then. And Bonsack he rebuilt it and filed a patent application on September the 4th, 1880. And the patent was granted the following year. So once he did it, once Bonsack made it, Allen and Ginter ordered a machine, but then they actually rejected it because they said that, and this is kind of crazy, they said that they didn't know how people would respond to a cigarette that was made by a machine, which is ridiculous because that was the whole point of your actual sweepstakes or whatever, or job posting. But some people said it was just so they could actually just save the prize money and they wouldn't have to give it away. But what actually happened was Bonsack just then went into business with a guy named James Buchanan Duke, and the rest is kind of cigarette machine history. Okay, so then now we get to cigarettes in modern America, and cigarettes were first, and I say cigarettes, I mean like the actual cigarettes themselves, not just the idea of using tobacco and smoking tobacco or whatever, but cigarettes were first introduced into the United States in the early 19th century. And before this, tobacco was used primarily in pipes and cigars by chewing and snuff, like we said, just sniffing it right up the nose. And by the time of the Civil War, the cigarette had become more popular, and federal tax was first imposed on cigarettes in 1864. And we'll talk a little bit more about federal tax later when I throw some fast facts at you guys about cigarettes, but we'll move on. Shortly afterwards, the development of the cigarette manufacturing industry led to their quickly becoming a major U.S. tobacco product. And at the same time, the populist health reform movement led to early anti-smoking activity. And from 1880 to 1920, this activity was largely motivated by moral and hygienic concerns rather than actual health issues, meaning they were just like, this is disgusting of a thing. This doesn't look good. It's not, that was like their whole move, instead of just being like, oh, you'll die from, cancer and stuff. Like it was a kind of a different actually like focus they had. And so in World War I, we'll see cigarettes were given out free to the soldiers in the form of war rations, which is like the ultimate version of the crack dealer giving you a pinch for free, knowing you'll come back, for more and buy double. And the evidence of that is that, and this is, the next war over, or next war over, but the next, imagine they were just wars, neighboring wars, but the next war afterwards, by the end of World War II, 4 out of 5 British men were smokers. And you have to believe that came from at least a part of it, that it being a part of their war rations. And since the 1920s, scientists and doctors have been able to link smoking with respiratory illness, and that's why I said earlier, from 1880 to 1920, the whole idea was like, oh, that's unbecoming, it doesn't smell good, it's not attractive. Then it becomes in the 20s, oh, this may actually be something that could like harm you. And that brings us right into cigarettes being connected to health, which is the whole thing. And I'm going to kind of go back, and we'll see that for a long time, people always kind of had an idea that I mean, you can just look at somebody smoking and be like, that's not something you want to do forever.
Coffin nails. Yes, that's what cigarettes are, according to the Medical Research Council. We've all heard something of the kind before, yet almost everybody smokes, including thousands young enough to know better. And as smoking is nowadays allowed nearly everywhere, it's on the increase year after year. So is lung cancer.
You know, in 1602, an anonymous English author published an essay titled Work of Chimney Sweepers, which stated that illnesses often seen in chimney sweepers were caused by soot, and that tobacco may have similar effects. And this is 1602. This was one of the earliest known instances of smoking being linked to health. So literally 400 years ago, you know, they were like, you know, this might not end well, guys. And so the first real protest about smoking cigarettes was just about how nasty it was. Like I said earlier, that was how they led their campaigns. But during the 1920s, the first medical reports linking smoking to lung cancer began to actually show up. And many newspaper editors refused to report these findings as they did not want to offend the tobacco companies who advertised heavily in their media. So it's like, we're not going to sit here and slander the guys who literally cut our checks. The milder flu cure tobacco blends used in cigarettes during the early 20th century made the smoking easier to inhale and increased nicotine absorption into the bloodstream. And during World War I, Army surgeons praised cigarettes for helping the wounded relax and ease their pain. And so you see that a lot with tobacco being really used as some sort of like pain reliever, which as someone who smoked, like I said, I smoked for years. I just don't get it. I just wonder, is it different? Was it a different tobacco? I'm not sure. Smoking was first linked to lung cancer and other diseases, like I said, right around the 20s, and then throughout the 40s and 50s, they would kind of just continue to build upon that research. And what's crazy is that in the early 1950s, there was a cigarette actually called Kent that used asbestos in its filters, and it was just like a part of like their makeup. And these cigarettes were actually marketed as healthier alternatives to the cigarettes that were already on the market. You can't make this stuff up. All right. So now to end this segment before we go into the other ones, we're gonna do just some quick fast facts about some tobacco and cigarette stuff. I think those are always some of the more interesting things. And so we got fast facts. And so in 2019, the largest tobacco companies spent $8.2 billion marketing cigarettes and smokeless tobacco in the United States. And that shakes out to just about $22.5 million every day. And then in the 1980s, there were almost 180,000 tobacco growing farms in America. And in 2012, there were only about 10,000. In the United States is the fourth largest tobacco producing country in the world, and that follows China, India, and Brazil. In 2018, two states in America, North Carolina and Kentucky, accounted for more than 70% of the actual tobacco cultivation in the entire country. Four companies, Philip Morris USA, Reynolds America Incorporated, ITG Brands, and Liggett, account for 92% of the U.S.'s cigarette sales. And let's see, on average, federal and state excise taxes account for 44.3% of the retail price for cigarettes. So like almost half of the price of cigarettes is just tax. A 10% increase in price has been estimated to reduce overall cigarette consumption by 3 to 5%. And that is how cigarettes and tobacco happened. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're going to round it up. Tobacco originates in the Middle Americas about 12,000 years ago. It spreads to Europe through Spain's conquest of the New World. Cigarette machines take it from a luxury item to one that can be used by all. Things I didn't know before. And now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? All right. Only had a couple of things that I really didn't know before, that I didn't kind of mention in the other segments. We'll say, let's see. I think there's only two. This first one is interesting. It's always interesting how chemicals affect outside chemicals affect your brain and stuff. So nicotine reduces the amount of rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep. And if we've talked about, I think it was in the episode 25, about dreams, and that REM sleep is some of the most important sleep that you get, that you need. And so the fact that I guess nicotine reduces that is, it's not good, but I would have never thought that it would, have an effect on it like that. And the last one, I guess this is, I did kind of mention part of this earlier, but I think the other part that I didn't know is how long it lasted. We mentioned the cigarette becoming a ration for the soldiers starting in World War I. This actually, I didn't know that, because this goes all the way up to Vietnam, and heck, it may even go even further. I'm not sure if anybody knows. If anybody who listens has ever, in the military or served in a war and could provide any light on that, hit us up on the Twitter page, at HDTHAPPENs. It's just HDT happen is, but yeah, so that's pretty much it for the things I didn't know, or that I was able to remember, basically. All right, that's been another episode of How Did That Happen? Always like to thank you guys for coming by and pressing play and going along for the ride. I see the listens are up a little bit. I see I'm getting listened to, getting picked up in a couple more countries. I see you out there, Australia. That's pretty cool. I don't know if there's anything else to get out. So I'll see you guys next week.